Hi, Marsha. Thank you so much for being here today and having this conversation with me. I know it's not our first time we've had chats, and I love them. I love our conversations. They always take us into unexpected places.
Yes, they do.
But I wanted to have you on today just to, well, number one, tell us a little bit about yourself. Today, we're going to talk a little bit, just a broad overview of why we're here. We've just recently launched our book, right? Owning Your Choices, that just launched yesterday. We're both so excited about it.
Yeah.
Marsha, you're sort of the facilitator that put all these beautiful 8 women together. We're going to talk a little bit about that. I want to know a little bit about your own journey in writing, When She Stopped Asking Why, your book.
Hmm.
And just, I want to give a little bit of background for our viewers on, I have a lot of people in my audience that want to share a little bit about, like, they're on the brinks of wanting to write this story. And I'll share what that experience is with, when I went through that experience. But what that looks like, and if you have this story inside of you, right? If you feel inspired to write this story, how you can go about like the process of doing that, because anybody can write their story, right? Everybody has a story inside of them. And so, I want everyone to listen to this conversation, because I think if that's you, you're going to pull something from this conversation and realize that you can also share that as well. So, tell us a little bit, before we start, a little bit of background on about you.
Awesome. I'm so grateful to be here today. Yes, we do have lots of conversations that go in many different directions. So I'm happy to be here to support you. A little bit about me. I started in the healthcare field for 27 years and basically have done everything from coaching and speaking and working with clients. And about 7 to 8 years ago, we started to deal with teen substance abuse at a level that I just would not wish on anyone. And our life took a completely different turn. And I ended up hiding from the world and not recognizing myself, hating who I was seeing, completely master deflector. If anybody asked me how I was, I could turn that question faster. I never talked about myself. And my circle became super, super small. I was just trying so hard to fix what was happening, and at the same time making it look like I was totally fine. And you can do that until you can't do that. Like eventually there comes a point where your body says, this is enough, and you break. And for me personally, I had a point where we almost lost both of our kids, and it was an eye opener that this isn't mine to fix anymore. This is not mine to control. I really started to dive into a lot of personal work and personal development and a lot of counseling, a lot of support to understand what was my choice and what was not my choice, what was my story, what was not mine. And I started to do some work on myself, which is really hard when you're in the middle of a lot of chaos, to not take that energy and put it to fix everyone else. And so, but I realized that I wasn't using any of the energy to help myself. So that's what I had to do. So I started to really do some work on myself, and I started to join some Facebook groups. And when I did that, I came across a group where I realized there was like 100,000 moms. And I was just like, well, what? And I needed to see that number, because I kid you not, I thought I was the only one having a problem.
Yeah.
I thought I was the only person having a problem. I figured I did something wrong. This is why, this was my life. And sharing in that Facebook group helped me to shift my thinking so that I could see, oh, like, I'm not alone. Wait, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not a bad person. I'm not a bad mom. All of these things that I had to really work through on my own. And then I started to share my story in the group, which some moms did. And as I started to share my story in the group, all of a sudden I found myself in a situation where I could share my story in a small stage, like a really small group. I had been working with the schools and being very honest with them. At this point, they had me in helping and talking to other parents, and realizing that it was like sharing my story became a way of learning how to share it from my point of view, not my kids, but from mine. Sharing my story then allowed me to help other people feel better and realize that they weren't alone. And then every time I did that, or every time I spoke on stage, I had people come to me and say, that's my story. You shared my story. And all of a sudden I started to see this really common theme of stories, that all of these people were struggling and nobody was talking. Like nobody was talking at all. I remember one in particular, Marisa, before I started to really share on bigger stages, and she, like, I went to the washroom and she literally met me and in tears, and she's like, I never told a soul. My son's 45. And I'm like, come on, we are carrying this shame for years. And then all of a sudden I started to speak and decide that maybe I'm supposed to do something with this. And if I really do trust the universe, and I have to really be in that space, that maybe this was my story for a reason. Like maybe I was actually supposed to do something with this story. And is there a way that I could turn it and be something positive to help other moms, other people who were stuck in a story that had gone terribly wrong? And it started to take a life on its own. And I had done a lot of journaling at this time, like a lot of journaling. And somebody referred me and said, you need to meet with a publisher. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to share my story. That's crazy. And well, there's a lot of steps in between. But yes, that's where that came to, that the book started to have a life of its own.
Wow. And just so for reference, this is her book, When She Stopped Asking Why. I absolutely, first of all, love this title. I have not dealt with addiction. My oldest is 19, but we've shared our personal stories, and there's so many commonalities in our story. And, my son was almost about 15, 14 when he wanted to go and move in with his dad full time, and sort of carrying that shame and that guilt of, how does my son want to leave, right? Carrying what kind of mother am I, right? And we tell ourselves these stories. And I remember you and I had connected, and I realized we have the same similarities, right? Different circumstances, but the same emotions of carrying that shame and that guilt. And what sort of allowed you to like disconnect from that? What sort of allowed you to say, like, this is my child's choice, right? Or for me, like my son, this is his choice to leave, and that doesn't reflect on who I am or who I am as a mother, right? Like, that's like sort of a pivotal moment where you realize, okay, I can't own all of this, right?
No, it's such a good question. That is such a good question. And it didn't happen overnight, but it happened fast. And the work that required for me to really like stand in that new truth it took a while, but it really did change. It was and I remember the moment when and I'll be honest, when my one son was in the hospital because he attempted suicide. At this point, there were heavy drugs going on. And I found him myself. So we got into the hospital. He was in the hospital when our other son overdosed.
Wow.
And I just sat there on the floor, and I remember going, I'm done. Like, I'm done. This is not, I obviously I'm giving this every single thing I have, and it's not changing. In fact, it's getting worse. And that's when I was like, but maybe it's not mine to fix. Maybe this is their journey, and maybe this is not mine to fix. And that's a terrible thing as a parent to have to come to. I think we all have to have that moment as a parent, regardless if you have the issues that we do, because our kids do grow up, they make different choices, they do things that we're like, what are they doing? But it is their life. I had to get to that space. So I had other things that happened, but I remember going and learning that, like with ownership, I remember reading Melody Beattie and Codependence No More, and a counselor referred it, and I was like, I'm not codependent, these are my kids. And then I started to read it, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm totally codependent. Totally codependent. I had no idea. And all that means for anybody who's listening is the fact that my entire life circulated around what they were doing. My entire life. And yes, they're kids, so I get that. But it circulated around it. And if we do that, then we're not taking any responsibility for our own life. So two things happen. if two people are trying to own the same problem, nobody owns it. So nothing changes. If there's no ownership for anybody, nothing will change,
Right.
right? It's impossible. That's the first thing that happens. And second is that I was losing myself. That I was like, you know, a lot of moms say I lost myself. Like I'm talking like I lost myself. I was trying everything I could do to change every single thing around me, and nothing was working. And all of a sudden, I still believe that we don't learn the word surrender until it's the only choice we have left.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's not, you can't read it. You can't go, I'm going to surrender. You can't do it until you literally are in a state that you've tried everything, that it's like, wait, maybe this isn't mine to do anymore.
Yeah.
And the second that happened, I realized, and I took ownership that I wasn't putting any energy back on me. I was losing myself as a person. I mean, I had gained, I'm in the healthcare field. I gained a lot of weight. I had no energy. I was eating poorly. I wasn't sleeping. It was just a heart attack waiting to happen.
Yeah.
And I just was not happy with any of that. And a counselor said to me that you will have to become a springboard so that if they ever come back to you, you can handle the process of, you know, having them in your lives. But right now you're a pile of sand. And it was true. So all of a sudden I had to create mantras. And if you're in a space where it's like, I don't know how to change this, you have to create a mantra that pulls you back and anchors you. And for me, it was, that's not my choice. Like I literally had to go to the space of, I didn't buy it for them. I didn't give them money for it. It's not my choice. Like it's not my choice anymore. And when I changed, I disrupted the status quo of everybody. And that was a lot of chaos. It was a different kind of chaos, because there would be times like police would come and I'm like, yep, there he is. Like, it's not mine. It's not mine.
Right.
I am not owning anything that's not mine. But that means I had to own what was mine. And that, I think, a lot as a mom, we don't do a lot of. We don't take that ownership for ourselves. That means like, no, I am taking time for me. No, I am doing what I need. And choice, like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, became such an anchor in my life that that's not my choice, but this is my choice, and I'm going to own that. So that's where that separation came from. It came because there was just no other options left.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, really difficult to do for so many moms, right? Because of that guilt, because we tell ourselves, but they're our child and we're supposed to sort of, you know, get them out of any situation, and that's our responsibility, and and being a crutch, right? Sort of being a crutch for them and not allowing them to step into their power and saying, hey, this has like your choices have your consequences that affect your life. And this is sort of what I do with my oldest, who's in college. He's away, you know, and an hour and a half away. I can't be responsible for the choices that you make. I'm not near you. And so every choice you make has some sort of consequence, and you have to own that. And I can't be responsible. And it was the same when he decided to move out and leave, you know, like being the kind of mom that I was at the time, very controlling and needing children to fulfill this need, this void that I had inside of needing to feel worthy. I needed my son to make me feel worthy to meet my needs, right? And then when he took that away from me, I was left with, oh my God, like I was left standing with my own dark shadows and having to face that. And like I said, had I not owned that, I would have been trying to like grab onto him.
Oh yeah.
He would have
over
been
and over. You would have
for me, right? I would have been trying to reach out for that drug of choice and needing him to make me feel whole. And when you talk about surrender, you're right. It's sort of after you've exhausted every option, when you're literally on the floor crying and you realize there's nothing left. Like either I'm going to learn how to pick myself up by myself on my own and figure out a way, or, you know,
I'm not going to make it. I actually didn't think I was going to make it at one point, to be completely honest. I just thought I'm just done. I'm done, but I'm also done fighting. And I was done fighting, and it was like, okay, so what else can I do? And the reason why the name of the book is so pivotal, because that was what had to change.
Yeah.
I had to stop asking why. Like I literally had to stop. The why was a victim question, and it kept me stuck. So my mantras of, it's not my choice. Like, what is my choice? I own my choice. Then the other mantra was that every time I said the word why, it was like, no, what? Like, what am I going to do? Because what was action? So I still think the years of personal development work leading up to that helped once I came to a space of surrendering, but I had to, like, the why had to go. And every time if my husband said, like, we should have done it this way, and I'm like, yeah, well, go back and change it. You can't. It's
Right.
done. It's done. Right. The why doesn't matter. If you're not going towards a goal, the why is a victim question, and that had to go.
Right. So what do you want to tell that person right now who's sitting with this story? Because you're saying, I'm like thinking back to you when you first went on that website, right? Because you felt alone. And it was the same for me in divorce. I felt
Yeah.
completely
Isolated.
alone, isolated. And this is sort of a universal feeling that everybody, I'm hearing everyone gets to, of
Yeah.
being in this dark place, right? You can't find the light without walking through that darkness.
No.
So you reached out, right? You connected to a group. What sort of inspired? Because I have a group, and I find it very difficult for people to because of the shame and the guilt and the fear that go along with being divorced, or divorced mom, that sort of stigma. It's sometimes difficult for people to speak up and to share their voice and their story. Like, what is a tool that they can use, or what can they be inspired by to just share something? Because I always, like we say, using our voices that's what heals us, right? Speaking our truth.
100%.
Like, how do you baby step that though?
That's a really good question. So shame is by definition saying that I am bad, right? Like, I am bad. And I think we have to look at that and really break down that definition. Like, is that true? Like, is that, sometimes we have to ask ourselves, like, is that actually true?
Right.
At that point, I remember asking myself, is there anything that you haven't done? I took my little piece of paper to the counselor, to the police, and I'm like, these are all my check marks. You told me I had to get, like, it's a kid with a grade. These are all the things you told me I had to do. And they would look at it and they'd go, like, yeah, you did that. I'm like, okay, so what's next? What do I do next? And they're like, nothing. It's not yours to fix anymore. So knowing that I had done everything I could possibly, there was no stone that I hadn't turned over. I needed to do that. Like, I needed to be in a space where I had tried everything possible. And so I think that's one thing. And really breaking down the story you're telling yourself. Is it true? Was I a bad person? No. Was I a bad mom? No. Did I make mistakes? Yes, because they don't come with a manual, and nobody could have prepped us for what we live with.
Right.
So I even say to this day, somebody said, do you think you make mistakes? And I'm like, yeah, 100% I made some, but I did do the best I could with what I had. And I had an awful chaos. So I think we have to break down what we're saying is our shame story. And actually, the reason I journaled so much was because I remember reading and hearing that thoughts in our head are toxic, and when they come out on paper, they lose their power. So I would write down what I was thinking to myself, and I would read it, and I'm like, who would I ever let talk to me like that? Right. There's no one I would let talk to me like that. I would lose my mind if somebody did. But why was I doing it to myself? I had to realize that the shame cycle, I say this with the most amount of love, the shame cycle comes from us. It's all us. All emotions that we are feeling are literally coming from us. No one's making us do it. No one is making us feel that way. We are doing that. And that's a really hard thing to own. So that's the first thing, is really breaking down the shame and asking the story and asking, like, what's true. Second is that we are so afraid of the judgment of others, and that we say nothing because it's important that we look good, whatever that means. And the judgment of others is, I always ask myself, like, I still get judged. I still get comments said to me. I get things put on my Facebook wall sometimes, and comments, and it used to really upset me, and I used to take it down. I don't do that anymore. I just let it sit there, because when people react that way, if you're coming across anyone in your life who does that, it says more about them than you. Okay. It does say more about them than you. But the judgment piece, this was my life, probably one of my biggest breakthrough moments, is no one could judge me harder than I judge myself. I had already torn myself down, up, down, left, right, back, center. So when somebody said something to me, I remember at one point going, I already said that to myself. I already said that to
Had no effect on
myself.
you.
So Yeah, it doesn't matter. So and then all of a sudden you could put that whole judgment piece into perspective. And I was like, I'm not going to let that stop me anymore. And all of a sudden, the things that were super, super heavy, like with shame, we try and keep out all of the pain from others. We try and keep out and protect ourselves, right? That's what we do with the shame wall. But the second you put the wall up, you just can't selectively block emotions, as Brene Brown would say. And I realized that I wasn't feeling any joy anymore. Like I had none. I didn't have any. My husband and I had no joy. Like there was no joy anywhere. So there's no joy. And I'm thinking I'm blocking out the pain. My world is getting smaller and my problems aren't changing. Like it's like, so now I've isolated myself from the world. So when you start to look at those things shame-wise, it helps you to maybe compartmentalize a little bit better, that it's not serving anybody for me to be stuck underneath this shield. Now I'm a bigger victim to my life and what's happening. So I hope that those tips help.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I love it. And definitely, like, how you do anything is how you do everything. So if you're blocking yourself out, you're blocking all the good as well, and not letting anybody in. And so, like you said, speaking that dismantles the shame, and then you realize you're not alone in that story. There's so many, and this is something I hear even in the divorce community as I share my writings or blogs, or other women comment and they're like, oh, thank you for sharing that. Like, I thought I was the only one. And people think that we think our problems are so unique, and they're not,
No.
But I want to talk a little bit about the book, Owning Your Choices, that just came out yesterday. And I want you to just share a little bit about where the idea, because you facilitated this book, you brought these women together. Where did that inspiration come from? And it's amazing. Thank you. But where did, I know it was a huge feat.
All good. It's all good. So it's funny because, being completely transparent, that was an idea of mine about 5 years ago. And again, very honest and real, is the fact that I wanted to create a space where more women could share their story, not share their story from a victim standpoint. And a couple of the groups that I was in, God bless them, they just were trying to sort through their own emotions. There was a lot of anger, resentment, rage, and victimhood. And I was like, okay, I know that that's not going to help me to move forward. And I don't want to stay here anymore. Like, I don't want to stay in this space anymore. So I really want to create this book to share women's stories. And then, but I really wanted women to attract women who were going to do something with their stories, not just stories, but stories they were going to do something with. But I was scared. I had imposter syndrome. I was like, why 5 years ago? No one even knows who I am. I'm not going to do that. And it's too scary. So I couldn't figure out my way around it. So I went the one route of doing my story first, which was scary as hell, so scary. But I did my story first. And when I did my story first, I decided to do my podcast. So I'm very intuitive in a sense. And I went, I think that I have to start a podcast. Own Your Choices, Own Your Life. 3 years ago, not a clue what I was doing, like literally no clue whatsoever, and made bazillion mistakes throughout it. But my gut just said, you got to start this. You have to start this. And so I kept starting it and going, and my book comes out and it reaches people that I really wanted it to, and is still available and doing well on Amazon. And then it comes to 2019 and I decide that I really want to, I think it's time for the collaborative book, but I don't know how it's going to look like, what it was going to happen. So I started to put it out there that I wanted to create this book. And I think this is important to put into context. I interviewed 60 women.
Wow.
I went back through my number, 62 to be honest, 62 women I interviewed who wanted to be part of this book. That meant that there were 62 women who wanted to share their stories with the world. And they were scared, no judgment there. They were scared of what people would say, but they were interested. They booked it. We had the call and we did it. And we had 8 women who came forward and went through with their stories. So if you put that into context, that really tells, like, I think it says a lot about the women who, and I'm grateful for all of them who came in. It's beautiful. So I started to cross paths and connect with, like, you and I had never met before. We still have met in person, but we talked many times. And my podcast in 2018 was starting to get some downloads in Africa. And I thought, wow, like, this is interesting. You can see that it's coming in Africa. What's happening? Well, I found I was getting this, you know, the messages, the Facebook message that if you're not a friend, it's going to that other box. And I found the other box. Anyways, I connected with this person, and her and I just started chatting. We chatted for about a year online. She had a great story. She was young, and she was very much, she goes, I just love how you are finding a way to share your story publicly. And for anybody who's listening, just to understand that when we get to a space of sharing our story vulnerably, I'm not sharing it about my kids. It's about me. It's about what I went through, right? And that's the part. I can't share theirs. That's their story. I have to share mine. And she really wanted to share her story. And when I decided to get the book together officially, I reached out to her, and she was like, but I'm a student. There's no way I can afford this, and I can't do it. I'm like, well, let's put it out to the universe and see what happens. And sure enough, her whole cost is covered, and she's part of the book. So to me, my original idea 5 years ago was to be able to create a book where we could share women's stories who are sharing their stories with you as the reader, and they are finding ways to do something with their story. So she's a victim of human trafficking, and she survived. 3 of them escaped. She was the only one who lived.
Wow.
And she has been openly sharing her story for the last 2 years and has created her own foundation and all these things. So to me, the purpose started to take on this whole new life and energy that I was like, when you start to share your story, and I know you can relate, you get to a point where it's not even about you anymore.
Right.
It's just what is it doing out in there? Who is it allowing to come forward? Who is it allowing to feel that they're not alone? And that's where the book came from. So it was an original idea 5 years ago, but I didn't feel I was in a space to do it. I wasn't ready, to be honest. Here's the thing. We have to grow into the person who can bring our stories to life, right? We have to grow into that person. And we can have incredible ideas and goals for our life, but we do have to grow into that person. And the person 5 years ago, she had the original idea, but she wasn't ready. She wasn't even close to ready to doing it. And so we have to go through those steps in order to get to that part, to be able to handle what it is that we're creating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the stories in this book are so inspiring, and none of the women are from all over the world in this book, right? With just varying stories. But I think like after people read the story or the book, like you can find inspiration and light in somebody else's journey, right? Like I always talk in my community that when I had gone through the most difficult time of my life, right, through my divorce, like I didn't have any mentors. I didn't have any models in my family that was like, I want to be like that. Like I that's what I'm missing. I had to go beyond the family unit and go out into the digital world, right? Or to book. So, and I was completely oblivious to this. You know, I had no idea what the world of self-development or what that even looked like. I couldn't even have this conversation. And so after going through my own process and writing this story, like I realized we need mentors, we need roadmaps, right? We need light. We need to be like that. This book for me is a guiding light for other people. And my chapter in the book is Untying the Knots of Divorce and Stepping into Your Purpose. And, you know, before we connected, we have a mutual friend that we connected through, and I had been telling her, you know, I was not a writer, and my limited beliefs told me that, Marisa, you're not a writer. Like, you know, journaling, you can journal, okay, you can write your stuff down, but you're not a writer. Although I was already blogging at the time, but I didn't consider that writing. And I was journaling, but I felt like this voice needed to come out. And I just told Sarah, our mutual friend, I was like, I just feel like there's this voice inside there, right? Like, I feel like I knew I had something to say, but it was something that was in the spirit, right? It wasn't in the head. It was this voice that needed to say something. And I didn't know what that meant or what that looked like. I didn't say I wanted to write a book. It just happened to be that she's like, you need to call Marsha.
I think we talked that day or the next day. Yeah.
You know, Sarah's the kind of friend where she says something, you do it, you don't ask questions. So I trusted that. And I was like, okay, so we connected, and I was just all in. It was divine timing. I was at that place in my life where I trusted this is exactly where I needed to be. I didn't have all the information and all the details. I didn't know what that looked like. I really wasn't even thinking about, oh my God, my story is going to be out in the world for the entire world to see, and I can't take it back. But
No.
like you said, I knew though this was my story, and I knew it wasn't my kid's story. It wasn't my family's story. It wasn't my ex-husband's story. It was my story. And this is what my story looks like in my world. And I'm going to tell it for me. And I sort of disconnected to
You have
what
to.
that meant, right, for everybody else, because it didn't matter. I was at a place where I've sort of healed through this
Mm-hmm.
experience. And now the story is not about me. It's not for me anymore. It's for somebody else. This
Yep.
is the roadmap. This is the light for somebody else. And you sort of step out of your ego of what are people going to say or think,
Mm-hmm.
connect to the spirit of this is for somebody else. Right. And so, because I have a lot of clients that are like, I'm at that place you were a few years ago, and that's where I'm at. And so I want to sort of give them a roadmap of, okay, yes, maybe you're still concerned about what people are going to think. So what are the steps? And for me, like, I have these two books that I have here, which is, the first one is, they're both from Janet Connor. This one is Writing Down Your Soul, which is basically how to journal, like in a way that connects to the spirit, right? And the other one is The Lotus and the Lily. It's like a sort of 30-day program. These books were sort of like the initial stages of, okay, how do I connect to this voice? I know there's a voice in there. I want to get out of my ego. I want to get out of the pain story, like you said, not the victim story.
No.
The book is not about the victim story. It's about how do we utilize the pain that we went through in order to give light to somebody else? How do we turn that around and not stay stuck there? And so that's why I honor you in having the inspiration to writing this book, because you're right. A lot of women, we can be stuck in this story of victimization, and they did this to me, and the anger and the pain, but that doesn't do, and it doesn't serve you or anybody else, right?
No, it's all hard. People say that to me all the time. Like, that's just, it's really hard to, it's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to share. And I'm like, yeah, but it's hard to stay miserable, and it's hard to stay stuck. So we
Right.
get to choose our hard. We always have a choice, right? The
Yeah.
choice is ours to have. Every time I doubt my next move, if I'm like, oh, I think I need to do this, but then I have a doubt, I remember, like, what has vulnerability brought into my life?
Mm-hmm.
And it has brought some of the most unbelievable people that I would have never, ever met.
Yeah.
And when I look at the people that are in my life today, they are people that I didn't know 5 years ago,
Right. Right.
7 years ago, 8 years ago. I've got a couple of really good friends. Other than that, the rest are all brand new.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't trade that for the world.
Right. You've
Mm-hmm.
cleared the space and the energy in order to because we're so afraid of loss, right? We're trying to hold on to something, and we don't want to
Yes.
open ourselves up.
Yes.
But that is what happened. And you know this, my own journey with, there was still stuff there that still needed to be healed. There was still some lingering residual parts of myself that I needed to sink deeper into. And in writing that story and in sinking into that, right, descending into the story, because as a writer, you get to this sort of place where you shut down the outside world and
Have to.
connect to what really matters within, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's so, I can't even explain how healing that is, because I remember, and this, when I read my story out loud,
Mm-hmm.
and I, like, literally the tears started pouring down, and I just, and it gives me chills still to this day. Like, I still remember how painful that story was, and to sit in that place, and it allowed me to have like a deeper sense of compassion for the journey that I went on, because it was difficult and it is painful, and I get it. So many people are sitting in the painful story, and they might be in it right now, but this journey is sort of writing it is allowing yourself to heal at this deeper layer that you just can't get anywhere else. And not for me. For me, I've had coaches, I've had counselors, and of course they all serve their purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the writing it and the vulnerability that comes with that There's nothing else like it. Like I just couldn't compare. And so that allowed me to heal the relationship that I had with my son, to find the unconditional love and the freedom to surrender deeper, and to really look at that and own it and be able to free myself from that. And after that, I realized my purpose lies in this story. My purpose is to help right now in the moment, is to help other women that are in this pain story right now. The pain that I went through, now I can use that for a light to help other women that are sitting in that pain. And so I think that's why it's so important, right, to share that part of our story. I think you froze for a second. Marsha, are you still there? Uh-oh, I think I lost you. You gotta love technology. I think we lost Marsha. Oh, there you are. We lost you for a second.
My screen was gone.
You were like, she's there.
Yeah, you were frozen, and then it's
split second. No worries.
all good. Zoom has a mind of its own sometimes.
Oh, that's okay. No, I just wanted to give the audience just a little roadmap, or how they can go about doing that. And obviously, and you tell us a little bit before I let you go. If somebody is in this position right now and they feel like they have this story that they want to share, how can you help them?
I have this program called the Radical Responsibility Mastermind. It's 12 weeks, and literally it's the steps I took. It's what I've done is I put the steps down, but I've broken it down even more. So we start with really like understanding what your story is, breaking it down. And that's difficult for people going through those first few steps, when all of a sudden you're realizing that, oh my God, I've been holding on to something since I was a kid, and I need to let go of that. So really taking you through all of the different parts of the stories that you've carried, and then pulling out what your lessons are and really understanding that, and then going through the self-care piece, other than just a self-care piece to call it. It's like, what does vulnerability look like? How do I share my story with the world? How do I find the courage to do that? How do I have boundaries? So that we have this whole module on building you up before you actually do share your story. See, a lot of people jump into business. This is my own opinion. A lot of people jump into business and are going to start a business, but we are our business, and no matter what we're doing. So if you're jumping into coaching, you're jumping into those things, we are our business. So we have to learn how to build ourselves up first to be able to show and be in the world what we want to do. So all the women that I work with are doing something with their story. They are, whether it's even a brick and mortar business, I've got a couple who do that. But what they're doing is they're pulling those lessons out. They're either starting a podcast, they're blogging, they're writing, they're being published, they're building a coaching program, they're running retreats. Those are all things that I have done. So I've really put together the steps of how to do that. And then really a big section on how to show up in the world, like how to use social media, how to put your voice to words, how to speak and not be a victim, right? It's very different. It's a little, my words that I use is that when we are a victim, we are in our story. We're replaying the situations. We are angry, we're resentful, all those things. When we learn how to stand on our story, so in versus on, that's when we have our power. And I don't want anyone trying to build a business until they figure out how to stand on their story. I really don't. So that's the big thing that I do. I do some one-on-one coaching, not a ton of it. And then I do my mastermind program. I have a really good grad program right now where I'm supporting these women through their businesses. And I did this collaborative book. I have ideas for another one. I'm just going to wait longer than a couple days before I start.
A little bit, okay.
I need a window. I need a window.
Downtown, and you need to get back to work.
Well, exactly. And you know what? The thing is with books, with collaborative books, it's a good learning curve for me. I did go through this. It's a good learning experience. My book was like 8 to 10 months longer coming to market than what I expected. And that was one author. So now when you combine up to 8 authors and people all over the world, different writing skills and editing, COVID, all of these things that happened, it was just, the process took longer. And I know when somebody said like, this is taking a long time. And I'm like, you know what? It'll come out in the right time. It'll come in the perfect time. It's it's a lot to bring women together to do this, but I've been really grateful to learn from that experience and to have each of you have each other. Like
Right.
the support you put out online, I honestly, I don't know how, I had another author reach out to me and she goes, I am so blown away at how these women are supporting each other.
Mm.
And one of the cornerstones of my business, I'm not taking ownership for that, but I'm just saying one of the cornerstones of my business is about collaboration.
Yeah.
If you cannot collaborate, if
Please.
you, so I don't just let anybody into my program. If you are not a person who can collaborate, then that's probably not the fit for you.
Right.
Because I believe in, like, strongly in collaboration. You know why I do? Because I did it for so long without it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know how small the world is when you try and do it by yourself. So with collaboration, we can support each other, and there is no competition. There is none, because we all bring ourselves to our businesses. So that's the one thing I would say with collaboration that's really, really important, is that they have to be able to work together. And we've learned, I think we learned through the process of the book, that we are so much more alike than different. Like,
Yeah.
even, I know we knew it, but we're so much more alike than different. So whether we are in a space of, like, you and I don't have the same story, but we resonate with the emotions that each other feel. And I think that's the eye opener for a lot of people, is you don't have to be up talking about your story. But if you have lessons that you've learned, two parts. If you have a story that's holding you back and it's keeping you stuck and playing really small and not serving you, and you're not happy in your life, then you want to do something about that, because that story is owning you. Like,
Yeah.
if you don't own it, it owns you. It's really
Right.
that simple. So simple.
Yeah.
Second, yeah, is that if you are in a space that you feel called to do something with your story, then, because you feel like you've kind of learned the lessons, and then please do that to pay it forward to someone else.
Yeah.
Because I
Right.
don't know, you and I have talked about this, but when I was in the depth of hiding behind my shame and my shell, I mean, I lived on Google. I was trying so hard to find solutions for how I was feeling, and there was none. So I'm like, if you feel called to do something,
Yeah.
please speak up, because the
Right.
world,
Somebody needs you. Yeah. Somebody needs you for.
somebody needs you.
And
Someone is praying for it.
just a testimony from my experience with the women in the group, we've all of us, almost all of us, have collaborated, like you said, on some level. We've helped each other, we've interviewed each other, we've been on podcasts together. Like, it's really grown my business through the process of this whole time. In writing the book, I developed a program, a digital course,
Right?
came out of this entire experience, which is Untying the Knots of Divorce. It's actually a program now that I just launched a few weeks back. And that all unlayered through this whole process. So it's not, there's so much more that you offer, right? It's not just a collaboration in the book, but it's really finding women in a tribe that supports you, your business, and you sort of meet everybody where they're at.
Yes.
And you bring other experts in there to help everybody with where they're at. And it's kind of weird because all of us were sort of on the same path and the same journey and the same place.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of, it just works, right? It's sort of effortless where we
It
all
worked so well. You were in my first group that we did. So you were my very first group that we did, and it has tweaked and changed a little bit as we've done, but the whole premise is very similar. But I love, if you look at it, you were in the first group that we did. So that was almost 4 rounds ago.
wow.
You're still collaborating.
Right.
Like, we're still, like, how powerful is
Well,
that?
forever, I mean, this is our legacy that we sort of together left behind. Where we're together. That's what I tell our girls. I'm like, we're in the world through our story, through our book together. So we're not going anywhere.
No, we're not going anywhere. Even when you think about how you and I connected, like, that's another beautiful example. Like, you talked to Sarah, and Sarah was like, you have to talk to Marsha.
Right.
That, I just love when other coaches do that. And sometimes, like, I just got a referral last week from another coach who's like, that's not, like, this is for you.
Yeah.
That's the energy that I like to collaborate with, is people who really truly know and do what's best for the client.
Yeah.
So when you do that collaboration,
it is really powerful. And, I grew up with this sort of comparison, this world of where we compared, growing up in this Italian culture where it was like we worried so much about what other people thought and how did our family look in this sort of comparison. And I had to dismantle that belief in my business because that serves nobody. And you're right. There is absolutely no competition. There's nobody who's like you. And your
Yep.
story is very personal. And you went through that to connect with somebody else. And yeah, we definitely are here to support each other. We're a community, right? And
100%.
so I'm going to definitely link your information of where people can find you through the group. And you guys, like Marsha said, she has an amazing podcast, Own Your Choices, Own Your Life. I'm in an episode.
Actually, what I'll do is I'll make sure that you have the link to like yours if you want to
Yes,
share your own.
yeah. Send me the link. I'll make sure everyone has the information. The link to our book of where you could purchase the book that just came out, Owning Your Choices. And
Mhm.
also your book too, because there might be somebody in here who's maybe dealing with substance abuse with their children, and how painful that is. And to have this road, this book, I read your book. It's amazing. My heart bleeds for you going through that experience, because on a different level, I can still relate to that letting go and that
I
surrender.
can tell you,
Great book.
I feel it when I read it still. There are times I go through and I reread parts of it and I'm like, I almost forget that was my life. To be honest, I'm just like, I was such a different person then. Yeah.
So powerful. And one thing we didn't mention is the fact that your relationship survived this chaos in the family. And like you said, a lot of times marriages and relationships don't survive this disruption. So if that's you, get this book of you like, it's really going to be very helpful for somebody going through that, right?
Yeah, I love that you said that. And it just reminded me that there was one point when a counselor said to me, we had a really good relationship with a counselor working with both of us. And he said that I don't know of another family going through this where the couple are still together. And you've dealt with this with both of your boys, not just one, both.
I mean,
And so I don't know how you've done this. He said, maybe you're supposed to do something with this. Maybe this happened to you for a reason.
yeah,
When you're in the thick of it, nobody wants to hear that.
right.
But then there was a light bulb moment that I'm like, maybe I am supposed to do something.
I think that's going to unlayer even further, because relationships in itself are hard, right? I coach a lot of divorced moms, and that in itself, but you add children and the substance abuse, and then if you don't, what that looks like when you don't own your choices and you're sort of blaming everybody else. I mean, I can't even imagine what that experience was like. But there are women who are dealing with that, and I know I do have women in my audience who are dealing with that. And this is a great place to start. Let something in here inspire you, because it is you are the example of what's possible. You
It
are
is
the example. You
possible.
have to be able to see it through, and
Yes.
to take ownership for sure. So
It's possible. It's hard work, but I wouldn't trade this for like this space now was worth every single ounce of hard work because to be honest, I'm a completely different person. I have a way better relationship with my kids, with my spouse, just because I'm a different person and I take ownership for myself. And you can't take two broken parts and make a marriage. You know that.
absolutely,
You just can't. We were so broken. So
yeah.
we each had to do our stuff with each ourselves in order to come together. Yeah.
That's just amazing. Seriously, I honor that in you, and thank you for being such a beautiful example of that, because there's not
You're
a lot of
welcome.
examples. And so thank you for that.
You're
Um,
welcome.
and yeah, if you guys have any comments or questions for Marsha, just feel free to put those in
Please.
when after I upload this, and then we'll put all the information so they can connect with you. Thank,
Awesome.
thank you, Marsha, for being here and for giving us your time and your energy. I really
Grateful.
appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.